What's good, family? It's your boy Big L, man, with another edition of the Black Labor White Wealth book discussion, man. This would be discussion number 5. Now, I give you the numbers so you can be able to reference those particular videos, man. Let's say when I get to video number 9, I can say, well, back in video number part 5, I talked about this. It gives you a reference point. So that's the reason for that. But this particular discussion, man, will be discussing an aspect where I have been incredibly adamant about for some time. I've been feeling some type of way. I have been saying this. I have been expressing this explicitly, and it makes some black folk uncomfortable, particularly those black folk who are in the older generation. And I understand. But what I'm talking about today in this particular section, man, of the book, I can't even begin to continue to tell y'all, man, how vital this book is to read, man. All right, still in chapter 1, the nature of the problem. It isn't that they can't see the solution, it is that they can't see the problem. This particular section, the death of the Black Civil Rights Movement. Even before I read this book, I never was a huge proponent or defender of the civil rights movement. I've always had a tremendous amount of respect and adoration for the folk who grinded out and put in work during the civil rights movement, man. I've always been really just had a whole lot of love for all the people the black folks who were involved in the civil rights movement. But I always felt like the civil rights movement was missing a piece. And for a long time, I couldn't understand what that piece was. I didn't know what it was because I'm like, man, you know, we did all this stuff and you endured all this, the hoses, the dogs, the lynchings, the beatings, the spitting, all that type of stuff. You endured all that, but not much has changed. We're still in real dire situations. So I always struggled trying to understand that. But when I began to read and research, particularly when I began to read this book and some other material, I see that the part that was missing was the economic aspect. Now, many people will say, and I agree with to a certain degree, that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., part of the reason why he was assassinated and was killed was because he began to push or take upon this idea of the necessity for black folks to have economic stability, that he began to see it wasn't just about white folks liking us, is that we had to have a piece of the pie, that we had to have a piece in the game, that there had to be an economic aspect. So I do believe to a certain degree that that was part of the reason why he was assassinated, because he began to push for that. And I believe that if he would have been able to live or wouldn't have been killed and he began to push economic empowerment, things would be a little different amongst black folks now. But here it is, the death of the Black Civil Rights Movement. Civil rightism for blacks had a brief life for the second time within a 100-year period, reached a point of diminishing returns, then died a premature death during the late 1960s. All the rights gained by the civil rights movement have been bequeathed to groups that are more acceptable to the larger society: women, gays, Hispanics, Asians, handicapped, and poor whites. Now, that for me, when I read that line, man, I read it again this morning, bro, and I was just like, that's the reality. I got a lot of people, man, who are pushing for black people to get out and vote. Pushing, man, pushing, grinding, yelling, screaming, putting in work for folk to get out there and go vote. And I'm like, no, I'm not voting. I'm not encouraging other black people to vote. It ain't because uh, I'm on some anti-vote type stuff, but you know what? Miss me with the fact that people, that line that people use all the time. Well, people gave their lives for you to vote. No, no black person ever gave their life for you to vote. They didn't. Let me tell you what happened. People had their lives taken in their fight for equality, and voting being one of those pieces, but they just didn't say, you know what, kill me so, in the future, Elgin will be able to pull the lever for me to vote. That's not reality. You don't have to manipulate me with them type of fallacies in order to get me to vote. The reason why I don't vote is because, for one, it's a card, and a card, it's an ancient system. It's an ancient two-party system. The system needs to be completely redone. But the fact of the matter is, if you don't own the candidates before the election, they don't owe you anything after the election. So I believe that with blacks having a strong, viable socio-economic infrastructure, meaning that they have some dough, they can either buy a doggone politician or rent one. And that politician would be getting their needs and their agenda pushed through legislature. And what we see is, as a prime example of how this takes place, is the gays and the homosexuals. I mean, the Hispanics, sir. The gays and Hispanics. What they have done is they have pooled their resources, their financial resources together, and pushed their agenda out there by buying or renting a candidate. So they come up with their agenda. They say, yo, we want this to take place. We want this bill to come through. So let's all of us gays get together in this particular section. We're going to pool our ideas, our agenda, and our resources. And who do we have who can go before these folk and push our agenda? And here's the money to do it. Hispanics have done the same thing in many cities across the country. Hispanics have, just come through, kept their culture, pulled their resources together, and went forth and either bought a politician or rented a politician in order for them to get the type of substantiated changes that they needed to have for their particular community. Black folks have failed to do that. Far too often we vote on popularity. Or what we have begun to do is, because we think there's been this absence of black politicians, that we need to vote based on skin color. But what we don't understand is, right now in America, we have more black politicians than ever before. But yet, the cultural climate and the climate for black people, we are just as endangered as we have ever been. But I don't think people are grasping that. Anyway, this is what Dr. Anderson says, man, beautifully. The Black Civil Rights Movement, though spectacularly successful in many respects, and that's why I agree with, in many aspects, I wouldn't say it was a complete failure. In some instances, it did have successes, okay? It had at least 4 major flaws that diminished the accomplishments of the movement and left critical imperatives for Black America. Now, you said there's 4 things that the Civil Rights Movement could have done differently and could have done better. And we're going to deal with those 4 things, man. Then it's very important to grasp that, okay? The first one, the movement's black leadership focuses entire weight of resources on achieving integration. They believe, perhaps naively, that by removing all the symbols of Jim Crowism and acquiring access to various segments of white society, black people would gain equality. And you got a whole bunch of Negroes today feeling the same way, who push unity, who push integration with the mentality that if they let us in, if they like us and bring us in, everything is okay. But what you're not understanding is integration was never an option to give us equal footing with the dominant white society. Now they might, because a lot of white people today feel like blacks are equal in status. But what they don't understand is, because of the way white supremacy, also known as systematic racism, has been set up and how it has touched every institution in America, it has prevented blacks from having equal footing. So black people, we tend to want to get integration, that if we can get in the same circles with them, we will have the same equal resources and standing and statuses done. What not understanding is you have always been behind in the race. You have been lapped several times in the race. So even if they come and begin to run next to you in the race, remember, they still already lapped you. You're still behind. But because we live in this foolish so-called post-racial mentality time frame era, that we got this mentality because I'm able to sit at the same counter with them and drink from the same water fountain, that we on the same doggone page. That's not reality. That's foolish. Number two, black leaders failed to focus on neutralizing the forces behind Jim Crowism or developing effective strategies for Black America to use in dealing with problems that spring forth from the maldistribution and racist control of wealth, power, and resources in America. The focus was, again, the large focus of the civil rights movement, which caused its eventual death, was the fact that it focuses on equality in view, instead of gaining aggregation of power, wealth, and influence. Number three, they failed, and this is a big one, they failed to develop a long-term national plan with goals and strategies spelling out where blacks ought to be going and how best to get there. Because there's no collective plan, that there's no huge plan, what we see is we see a whole lot of individual directions, that everybody's going their own different direction trying to get to the same place. But if we would come together and ride together, we would arrive together with strength, numbers, and our power, wealth, and influence. Number four, in addition, black leaders failed to construct a national network of institutions to train new generations of blacks who could successfully assume leadership positions and implement a national plan for black empowerment. The legacy that was left for us by the Black Civil Rights Movement was a legacy of watching them work hard to accomplish some things, when we needed was a plan to follow in case the leadership was no longer available and no longer around. And right now, we have leaders who have risen, but most of the leaders who have risen out of conflict, have risen out of a dire need for a leadership, not because we're being proactive. Many of our leadership has come in because we've been reactive. Okay? The combined effort of these four major failures left the Black Civil Rights Movement with no place to go, no way to get there, and no leadership to take them. A few visible black organizations managed to survive by becoming politically correct and expanding their focus to include so-called minorities, poor people, gays, women, abused children. They could not survive in the powerful conservative climate by continuing to target the problems of blacks alone. Listen, one of the words that I hate absolutely being called more than anything else is not nigger or colored. I hate being called a doggone minority. And why do I hate being called a doggone minority? Because minority is one of the most ambiguous doggone terms on the planet. Everybody and their doggone mama can be a minority. There's no exclusivity to the term minority. It's all inclusive. And the reason why many of these so-called black organizations, NAACP, the Rainbow Coalition, Urban League, and the list can go on, who at one time were black organizations, no longer are black organizations. They're minority organizations because they have allowed everybody in, and they are no longer specific and exclusive black. We have none. No national organizations that are exclusively black and specifically black. Other races have them. Other races have those same type of organizations, but it's almost like Negroes are scared nowadays to create them type of organizations because they worry about what everybody else is going to say. But because I come up with a black organization, now I'm racist because I want to take care of black folks. But nobody else is calling Hispanics racist, Asians racist, white folks racist. The National Urban League and NAACP are still active, but they have lost much of their influence and membership and their credibility. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and the Black Panther Party are defunct. And when he says defunct, they're not. He's not saying that they're no longer in existence. They just don't have the same type of influence that they once held. The nation's political apparatus disabled many of the civil rights groups by destroying or neutralizing black leadership. Adam Clayton Powell, Stokely Carmichael were discredited. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Medgar Evers were assassinated. Rat Brown, Eldridge Cleaver, Angela Davis, and prominent members of the Black Panthers Party were criminalized. And we see that time after time, man. The problem of race and resources in the conclusion, okay, in conclusion of this chapter, all right, this is a conclusion of the nature of the problem. The problem of race and resources has been festering for hundreds of years, but has yet to arise as a core public issue in America. Whites have inherited the power and wealth of their ancestors through a social and economic structure designed and weighted to the advantage of non-blacks. Blacks have inherited a legacy of permanent poverty and powerlessness. Black labor made this nation strong, wealthy, international world power, but nothing has been proposed to seriously bring about parity or fairness to black people. It is clear that blacks must both solve their own problems, which we're seeking, which we're looking for. We're not looking for handouts, and structure a national plan of action that puts their priorities first and foremost. Self-empowerment is the only road to economic justice, but it requires the support of a national policy and plan of action. That was the conclusion of chapter 1, man, of Black Labor, White Wealth, the nature of the problem. As we've seen here, man, the death of the civil rights movement was a key cog into where blacks currently reside, man. I look forward to hollering at y'all again here soon, man. Thank you for taking a chance to look at this video, man. I'm continuing with the book discussion of Black Labor, White Wealth. It's your boy, Big L. I love you.